Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we return to the heartwarming story of a father and his little daughter, Trieu Duong and baby Truc Lam. As Truc Lam grows day by day, Trieu Duong begins to realize that she will soon need a safe space to crawl and explore. So he decides to build a small bamboo fence right in front of their home with his own hands. And instead of leaving her inside, he gently carries little Truc Lam on his back while working throughout the day, slowly building the fence piece by piece to create a safe little place just for her. If you enjoy peaceful countryside life and touching father-daughter moments like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next videos. Early one peaceful morning, soft sunlight slowly spread across the small yard in front of Trieu Duong's house. The countryside was quiet, with only the sounds of birds singing and leaves rustling gently in the breeze. Like every other day, Trieu Duong began his morning by taking care of baby Truc Lam. He brought a soft blanket outside and laid it down on the ground near the front porch. The morning air was fresh, and the gentle warmth of the sun made the space feel calm and comfortable. Carefully, he placed Truc Lam on the blanket. The baby waved her tiny hands in the air and kicked her feet happily, staring up at the bright sky and the moving leaves above her. Everything around her seemed new and fascinating. Trieu Duong squatted down beside her, smiling. "Good morning, little Truc Lam," he said softly. To him, moments like this meant everything. Becoming a father for the first time had completely changed his life. Every day he learned something new about caring for a baby. Sometimes he still felt clumsy and unsure, but every smile from Truc Lam made all the effort worthwhile. He watched her quietly for a moment. Right now, she was still very small, just lying on the blanket and observing the world around her. But babies grow fast. Soon she would begin rolling over, then crawling, then trying to explore everything she could reach. Trieu Duong slowly looked around the yard. The space in front of the house was wide and open. There were patches of grass, areas of dirt, and a few scattered stones. It was peaceful, but it wasn't exactly safe for a baby who might start crawling everywhere. He imagined Truc Lam a few months from now, moving across the ground, reaching for things, possibly crawling too far away. The thought made him frown slightly. "If she starts crawling here, it could be dangerous," he murmured to himself. There were tools nearby, uneven ground, and other small things that could easily become a problem for a curious child. Trieu Duong scratched his head while looking at the empty space in front of the house. Slowly, an idea came to him. "What if I build a small fence here?" he thought out loud. It didn't need to be anything fancy, just a simple bamboo fence that would create a safe play area. Inside that space, Truc Lam could lie down, crawl around, and play freely without him worrying too much. The more he thought about it, the more the idea made sense. Yes, that would work, he nodded to himself. But before doing anything else, he needed to take care of Truc Lam first. He gently picked her up from the blanket and carried her inside the house. It was time for her milk. Trieu Duong prepared the bottle carefully, checking the temperature like he had learned to do over the past weeks. He sat down with Truc Lam in his arms and slowly fed her. "You need to grow strong," he said softly. "Dad has some work to do today." Truc Lam drank quietly, her small eyes looking up at him. After she finished the bottle, he gently patted her back until she let out a tiny burp. Trieu Duong laughed quietly. "Good girl." Instead of putting her down to sleep immediately, he sat with her for a little longer until she looked calm and comfortable. Once she seemed relaxed, he stepped outside again and stood in the yard, studying the space carefully. If he was going to build a fence, he needed to plan the area first. He grabbed a rope and began measuring the ground in front of the porch. Step by step, he marked out a square-shaped space that would become the play area. It needed to be big enough for Truc Lam to crawl and move around comfortably, but also close enough to the house so he could keep an eye on her while working. After walking around the marked space a few times, he nodded with satisfaction. That should be perfect. Next, he picked up a shovel and began digging small holes along the outline he had created. Each hole would later hold a bamboo post that would support the fence. The soil was firm and digging required effort. With each push of the shovel, clumps of dirt piled up beside the holes. The morning sun slowly rose higher in the sky, and sweat began forming on Trieu Duong's forehead. But he kept working steadily. After digging several holes, he paused and looked toward the house where Truc Lam was resting inside. He walked back to check on her. The baby was still calm, gently moving her tiny hands. Seeing her peaceful face gave him more motivation to continue the work. Back outside, he continued digging hole after hole, spacing them evenly along the marked boundary. By late morning, a row of holes was already prepared. Trieu Duong stood up straight and stretched his back. "All right, next step," he said. The fence post couldn't just be random wood. He needed strong, straight bamboo to make the structure stable. That meant he had to go to the nearby forest. But this time, instead of leaving Truc Lam at home, he decided to bring her with him. He took a long cloth and carefully wrapped it around his body, securing Truc Lam comfortably against his back. She rested there safely, her small head peeking over his shoulder. Trieu Duong adjusted the cloth to make sure she was stable. "There we go," he said gently. "You can come with Dad." With Truc Lam tied securely on his back, he picked up his cutting tool and started walking toward the forest path. The narrow trail leading to the forest was familiar to him. He had walked it many times while gathering materials for small projects around the house. Birds chirped in the trees above, and sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating shifting patterns of light on the ground. From behind his shoulder, Truc Lam quietly observed the moving scenery. Trieu Duong smiled. "See all these trees, little one?" he said. "Dad is going to find some bamboo to build your safe play area." Soon, they reached a small patch of bamboo growing along the edge of the forest. Trieu Duong carefully walked between the tall stalks, examining each one. He needed bamboo that was straight and strong enough to become fence posts. He tapped one bamboo stalk with his hand. "This one looks good." With careful movements, he used his tool to cut the bamboo. Each chop echoed softly through the quiet forest. Truc Lam remained calmly tied to his back while he worked. One by one, several straight bamboo poles fell to the ground. After collecting enough bamboo, Trieu Duong trimmed the branches and stacked the poles together. "These should be perfect," he said with satisfaction. Now came the harder part, carrying everything back home. He gathered the bamboo poles into a bundle and slowly began walking back along the forest path, with Truc Lam still resting safely on his back. By the time they reached the house again, the sun was already higher in the sky. Trieu Duong placed the bamboo down in the yard and took a deep breath. "All right," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Now the real work begins." After placing the bundle of bamboo down in the yard, Trieu Duong slowly untied the cloth from his back and carefully lifted Truc Lam into his arms. "You did great coming with Dad," he said softly. The baby blinked at him with curious eyes, her small hands moving gently in the air. Trieu Duong smiled for a moment, then looked at the pile of bamboo waiting on the ground. There was still a lot of work to do. Instead of leaving her lying on the blanket this time, Trieu Duong had another idea. He picked up the long cloth again and wrapped it around his shoulders and waist, carefully positioning Truc Lam against his back. He adjusted the cloth several times to make sure she was secure and comfortable. Her tiny head rested just behind his shoulder, while the cloth held her safely against him. "That way you can stay with Dad while I work," he said. Once everything felt stable, Trieu Duong bent slightly and picked up one of the bamboo poles from the ground. The afternoon work officially began. First, he needed to cut the bamboo into equal pieces that would become the fence posts. He placed one long bamboo stalk across two wooden supports and grabbed his handsaw. The sound of the saw scraping against the bamboo filled the quiet yard. With each steady push and pull, the bamboo slowly separated into shorter sections. Behind him, Truc Lam moved slightly but remained calm. Occasionally, she made soft little sounds, almost like she was talking while watching what he was doing. Trieu Duong chuckled. "Yeah, we're working together today," he said. Piece by piece, the long bamboo poles became evenly cut posts, stacked neatly beside him. The sun continued climbing across the sky, warming the small yard. Sweat began forming on Trieu Duong's forehead, but he kept moving steadily. Every now and then he paused and reached behind him, gently touching Truc Lam's tiny hand. "You, doing okay back there?" he asked. She responded with a small cooing sound. "That's good." Once enough bamboo posts were prepared, it was time to place them into the holes he had dug earlier that morning. Trieu Duong carried the first bamboo post to the edge of the marked area. Balancing carefully so he wouldn't shake too much, he lowered the post into the first hole. Then he grabbed the shovel and began pushing the soil back into the hole around the base. The shovel struck the ground with a steady rhythm. He packed the soil firmly around the bamboo until it stood straight and stable. Trieu Duong stepped back slightly and looked at it. "One post done," he said. Then he moved on to the next hole. Working slowly and carefully so Truc Lam remained comfortable on his back, he repeated the process. Each bamboo post went into its place, and the soil was pressed firmly around it. Little by little, a line of vertical bamboo posts began forming around the square area in front of the house. The work was slower than usual because he was carrying the baby, but Trieu Duong didn't seem to mind. In fact, having Truc Lam with him made the work feel less tiring. Sometimes he spoke to her while working. "You see this one?" he said while adjusting another post. "This is part of your fence." The gentle breeze passed through the yard, and the quiet sounds of the countryside surrounded them. After a while, all the vertical posts were standing firmly in the ground. Trieu Duong wiped the sweat from his face and looked at the row of bamboo. "All right," he murmured. "Next step." Now he needed to connect the posts together to form the fence frame. He walked back to the bamboo pile and picked up several thinner bamboo poles he had cut earlier. These would serve as horizontal rails between the posts. Holding one bamboo pole in place between two posts, Trieu Duong used a rope to tie it tightly. He wrapped the rope several times around the bamboo and the post, then pulled the knot firmly so nothing could move. The bamboo creaked slightly as the rope tightened. "Nice and strong," he said quietly. Behind him, Truc Lam shifted slightly and made another soft sound. Trieu Duong laughed. Yes, we're almost done." He moved to the next pair of posts and repeated the same process. Tie the rope, pull it tight, check the stability, then move on. The horizontal bamboo rails slowly connected, each post together, turning the scattered poles into the shape of a real fence. The work required patience and balance. Every movement had to be careful so the baby on his back stayed comfortable. Sometimes Trieu Duong gently bounced his shoulders while working. "Still there?" he joked. Truc Lam answered with a tiny sound. The afternoon sun slowly began drifting toward the horizon. Golden light spread across the yard, illuminating the bamboo fence as it gradually took its final shape. Trieu Duong tightened the last rope knot and stepped back to inspect the entire structure. The small bamboo fence now surrounded the open space exactly as he had planned. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid and carefully built. He nodded with satisfaction. Done. Finally, Trieu Duong carefully untied the cloth and lifted Truc Lam from his back. "You helped Dad finish the whole thing," he said warmly. He carried her into the fenced area and spread the soft blanket on the ground inside. Then he gently placed her down in the middle. Truc Lam kicked her tiny legs happily, looking around at the new space surrounding her. The bamboo fence formed a small protective boundary around the play area. Trieu Duong sat down beside her, resting his arms on his knees. For a moment, he simply watched her. The baby lay peacefully on the blanket, waving her hands and staring up at the sky. Seeing her safe and comfortable inside the space he had built filled him with quiet satisfaction. He reached down and gently held her tiny hand. "There you go," he said softly. this place is for you. The evening light slowly settled across the quiet countryside. Trieu Duong remained sitting beside Truc Lam inside the small bamboo fence, feeling calm and content after a long day of work. One peaceful morning, Trieu Duong places baby Truc Lam on a soft blanket in front of the house and begins thinking about her future. As she grows, she will soon start crawling and exploring everything around her. Realizing the yard may not be completely safe, he decides to build a small bamboo fence to create a secure play area for her. After preparing the space and digging holes for the posts, Trieu Duong carries Truc Lam on his back and walks to the nearby forest to cut straight bamboo stalks. Back at home, he carefully cuts the bamboo into pieces and begins building the fence step by step. Throughout the day, he works patiently, with Truc Lam resting safely on his back. By evening, the small fence is finished, creating a safe place where Truc Lam can lie down, play, and grow under her father's loving care.